Can everyone stand, please? Are you seated? Video. We have a video. No, already shown. And we are going to have a short video.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
I was in Claremore, Oklahoma, in a medical clinic that I was calling on the physicians in that area. And I was in the waiting room and someone came in as one of the patients and he said, somebody flew a plane into the Twin Towers. And I was thinking a small plane that most people were thinking. But suddenly, about 10 minutes later, another individual came in and said somebody flew another big plane into the towers. So suddenly, the mood in the room totally changed, and people began to realize that this was something significant, something really important that had happened.
I was an assistant editor at the time. It was 10 or 10:30 before a decision was made to put out an extra. We kind of divided into teams where some people were trying to find people who may be local people who were in New York that we could get hold of. Others were finding out, well, how is this affecting airports? And so it was pockets of information. We called schools. How are you what are you doing here today? Are you even letting the kids know? Design-wise was eye-catching. It was kind of heart-gripping to I remember just staring at it for the longest time.
And that led me to want to get home and get my hands on a copy of the Globe special edition.
We had people standing on street corners just handing them out as cars went by. It was truly an effort to get the news out as quickly as we could and be an important part of this news day for our community. There were not a lot of special editions that went out that day.
It is unique in newspapers. It is rare to find any newspaper that's dated 9/11. Even the New York Times is 9/12. And I like collecting things that are rare, unique, and prominent events in history that most people can remember, but nobody generally thinks to keep. So the fact that the Globe did this on a special situation, that really in itself makes it unique. Then when you add the 10 signatures of the people who were in office the day of the tragedy, that changes it basically from a newspaper into a historic document. It took 4 years for me to gather all the signatures, and then it has been in hiding for 11 years. So this has been a very long-term project for myself that I think it was the ideal time with the 15th anniversary to bring the document out and make the public aware of its existence at the museum. We are the repository of Joplin's and national history, and this is the best place for these kind of documents to reside.
Newspapers are incredibly valuable in telling history. They are a primary source, and a special edition makes it even more special. So it was very important that we get that document for posterity.
I think the thing that we have to do is make sure that we don't forget. We live in a society where attention spans are pretty short when it comes to the public, and this constant reminder is something that I think is very important to revisit the issue with future generations, because we have college students entering college today that were barely infants when this event happened, and high school students weren't even born yet. So this is a way of enlightening them and getting them to understand the history and the importance of it.
It's very humbling to be here, remembering all those who died on 9/11/2001. I think we're all sitting here in this room today thinking, boy, it's hard to believe it's been 15 years. And thinking about how that fateful day changed our lives and how we do things forever. I want to thank Missouri Southern for hosting this event, and specifically Dr. Alan Marble and Darren Fullerton, as well as the rest of the Missouri Southern staff who are part of today's event. I also want to welcome our local dignitaries, Charlie Davis, Bill White, Bill Rybolt, Senator Ron Richard, Tom Flanagan, Gary Shaw, Mayor Mike Siebert, and Matt Stewart for coming. For those of us who are old enough to remember, we all know where we were when the attack happened and how people around the world prayed with us as we were so brutally attacked. So being part of this event today, where we're part of that history, is incredibly humbling, and it makes us really appreciate kind of where we've come from and kind of the role that we've all played in our recovery from that day. So I'm very thankful to be able to be up here and to welcome some special guests here. We're going to have John Ashcroft, who's our Attorney General at the time and our past governor, Jim Talent, who is our U.S. State Senator, and Steve McIntosh will be here speaking on behalf of Roy Blunt, who was our congressman at the time. And then we have Alan Shirley, who will be making the special presentation to us today. First, we're going to have Steve McIntosh speak in behalf of Roy. Senator Blunt served as the U.S. Representative of Missouri's 7th Congressional District from 1997 to 2011, and as House Majority Whip from 2003 to 2007. And he successfully ran for the United States Senate and has served that office since 2011. So Steve, you have the podium.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of U.S. Senator Roy Blunt. And as Mike stated, at the time of 9/11, he was U.S. Congressman Roy Blunt, serving the 7th Congressional District. As a member of the House of Representatives at that time, he was on the House Intelligence Committee. Today, in the U.S. Senate, he is on the Senate Select Intelligence Committee. He receives briefings that are way beyond my classification grade. But Roy would be the first to tell you that on 9/11, not only should we look back at what happened on that date, but we should also use those thoughts to remember that the world is a very dangerous place for U.S. citizens. We should be very vigilant. We should pay attention to what's going on and do our best to keep from having another 9/11 happen on our shores. That means certain sacrifices we all have to make, be it when we travel by air or other things. But it's still a very dangerous place for the United States citizens. Having given a little bit of the history of Roy being in Congress, we had Senator Jim Talent in office as a U.S. Senator. John Ashcroft had been a U.S. Senator, and this is, I got to say this. When I think of 9/11, John, as you asked me to call you, I think of a Garth Brooks song, Unanswered Prayers. You had lost an election for re-election for senator, but then you were appointed U.S. Attorney General. And knowing you and how you think and do things, I cannot think of a better person to have had as U.S. Attorney General in the aftermath of 9/11. I really mean that. Thank you. Again, it's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of Senator Blunt as we remember 9/11 in the aftermath and the folks that lost their lives. And let's use that to move forward as best we can. Thank you, folks. Bye.
Our next speaker is going to be Senator Jim Talent, who's elected to the Missouri House of Representatives in 1984, serving 4 terms, including 2 as Minority Leader. In 2002, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. He served as senior advisor to Mitt Romney's 2008 presidential campaign and on his economic policy team in 2012. Mr. Talent is a distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
Thank you, Mike. There we go. Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. Great to be back in Joplin. And great to be here with so many friends and to see old friends again and to thank them again for the many kindnesses they showed me when I was in office. It's a pleasure to see John Ashcroft, who was my first leader in politics because John was governor when I served in the legislature and then became the Republican leader in the late 80s. And John, that was over 25 years ago, which is hard to believe. One of the comforts on the day of 9/11 was knowing that there were some people already in high office who had the wisdom and clarity and sense to guide and protect the country in the aftermath of that terrible day, and John was one of them. Congressman Blunt, who was in the House at the time, was another. And I just told the Attorney General that I remember well visiting his apartment in Washington thereafter, and Janet was there, and he told me that being Attorney General wasn't much fun after 9/11. and I can well understand that. I also want to thank Alan for organizing this and for preserving that newspaper article. It was a pleasure for me to sign it, and I think it is significant. And it was great that the Globe was able to put it out on the day of. I just have a few observations that I wanted to make. I haven't spoken for a while at a September 11th remembrance, and I wanted to share some thoughts with you. It is hard to believe that 15 years have passed since the events that we're gathered here to remember today. September 11th, 2001 is a day that to me will always seem like yesterday. And I think many people feel that way. It's frozen in the minds of Americans who are old enough to remember it. It's like President Kennedy's assassination. We all recall what we were doing the moment we heard about the attacks. We all remember the shock and the horror and the outrage of seeing in real time devastation inflicted on two great American cities. There were over 8,000 casualties on that day. There were 2,996 deaths. And those who died represented a cross-section of the country. They were men, women, and children. There were 11 unborn children who died on September 11th. They were of all different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, ages, and occupations. But they had some things in common too. They were all living human beings, just like us. Each had a beating heart and a vital soul. Each was precious to a network of friends and families. All were innocent. None of them deserved to die, and each had begun that day entirely unaware that by the time the day had ended, he'd meet his maker. When I think about September 11th for long, the human cost of it is almost too much to bear. It reminds me of one of my favorite lines from Shakespeare, from King Lear. I do not take this from report. It is, and my heart breaks at it. Yet it's necessary to think about it, and it's important that we gather together to remember, and also to renew our resolve, which Steve talked about, to continue and complete the task that remains before us. Because the enemy who attacked us on September 11th is still attacking us today. There are hundreds of thousands of brave Americans who fought for us and are fighting for us still in law enforcement, in the intelligence community, in the armed forces, and probably one or two of them are here with us this afternoon. And yet, despite their efforts, it has to be said that the influence of the enemy is spreading. On balance, his strength is growing. His aspirations are as barbaric as ever, and his methods are even more cruel. I have spent most of my time since I left the Senate in the national security arena, and I have to tell you that the enemy is seeking to empower himself with even more terrible weapons, nuclear weapons, bioweapons, cyber weapons, that he'll use those weapons if he acquires them, and that they have the potential to inflict injury, which will make even the events that we are remembering today seem small by comparison. Well, that must not be allowed to happen. And the good news is this: it shouldn't happen and won't happen if we remain determined to prevent it. You know, I see people get discouraged about the length and difficulty of this conflict, and I understand that, but I want to assure you that the task is by no means too great for this country. If we use really only a small fraction of America's enormous latent power, but we use it with purpose and clarity and consistency and unity and common sense, we will overwhelm the enemy. And I think we may be surprised at how quickly we can do it. So the events of September 11th opened a new chapter in our long history. The chapter began in the tragedy that we remember today. I hope that we will resolve to close it in victory, and close it soon, and close it certainly before another 15 years have passed. That, I believe, is a debt that we owe to the dead, and also to the living, to the past, and also to the future, to our communities for their safety, but also to our national honor and our civilized way of life. So again, God bless you all. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be with you today.
Attorney General John Ashcroft served as the 79th Attorney General of the United States from 2001 to 2005 during the George W. Bush administration. He previously served as the 50th Governor of Missouri from 1985 to 1983, and also served as a U.S. Senator from Missouri from 1995 to 2001. Mr. Ashcroft, could you come to this podium, please?
Well, thank you very much. And Jim, thank you for your excellent remarks. Those are insightful observations. I remember early in your time as a member of the Missouri House of Representatives, you came to my office as governor. And I wanted your support in regard to a program. I don't remember the program or the issue. I do remember the principle. I said, here is the reasoning that supports what I want you to do. And you looked at me and said, Governor, I'm as afraid of doing things that there's good reasoning to support as I am of things that are not well reasoned, because people have the ability to justify just about anything when they want it done in government. I've never forgotten that. We have to beware of finding ways to excuse doing things in government that ought to be done by the citizens, and you reminded me of that in a way that's been indelibly marked in my mind ever since, and I'm grateful for it. I want to thank my wife Janet for being here with me. She and I are the ones who are in our 70s. I'm not the John Ashcroft you see signs for all over the place running for Secretary of State. That's our son, and he has more qualifications than I do. You know, I just went to college and law school. He has a couple engineering degrees and went to law school, but all that's aside, he is our son, and we are grateful for him because we believe he would be a spectacular public servant. In 2001, September the 11th dawned as a clear September day in Washington, D.C. A sort of has-been pilot. I looked around the day and I think I referred to it as a severe clear. It was crystal. I'd been instructed to go with some of my aides to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to participate in helping young students develop an appreciation for reading skills. The president was in Florida helping students by reading to students in Florida schools, so I was on my way to do it in Milwaukee. And such a crystal day made it a privilege and a pleasure to fly over the United States of America. Occasionally, from one of the smaller planes, you can look down and see what appears on the map that you look at when you're looking at a book, and it looks identical. I was pointing out the various parts of the Great Lakes, and I remember Kalamazoo was on one side of the plain in Michigan, Grand Rapids on the other side of the plain. And I love that part of Michigan because the Grand River runs through there, and people in Grand Rapids can literally take their lunch hour and go down and fish for salmon that comes up out of the, it's a marvelous setting. And the voice barked back into our cabin out of the cockpit and said, General Ashcroft, call the command center. Well, it's not uncommon when you're traveling as a member of the cabinet, particularly as the Attorney General, to be asked to call the command center. There are a variety of things that might be mentioned to you, the command center of the Department of Justice turns out to be a communications hub. And it's understandable that the Attorney General of the United States should never be without a capacity to be spoken to or counseled with. But I turned and learned of the various assaults that were taking place against the United States government. And when I turned back to the members of the Justice Department who were flying with me on the airplane, according to them, I don't have this as clearly in my memory as they do in theirs, I uttered the following words. I said, "The world will never be the same." And there is a sense in which, at least for us in the United States of America, a different kind of world had emerged on 9/11. It was a world where values which we had anticipated as being endorsed and loved by all of mankind would, to some of mankind, be an affront and a threat. The core value of the United States of America is a value I would refer to as liberty. It was a value expressed far earlier than the Declaration of Independence. In 1706, for example, Isaac Norris, one of the assemblymen in Philadelphia, 3/4 of a century before the shot heard round the world at Lexington and Concord, he and his friends ordered a bell from England. And it wasn't just to be an ordinary bell, a dinner bell, or a church bell. It was to be called the Liberty Bell, because liberty is the core value that was even expressed in those days. And inscribed in the metal of the bell were the words from Leviticus: "Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof." Of course, you know later on that the Sons of Liberty were the folks who in in Boston, who threw the tea into the harbor in a revolution against a king that disrespected the liberty of the American people. And of course, the documents at the core of America's existence, the Declaration of Independence, starts with that language we could all recite from grade school. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain, and alien among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And in retrospect, it's clear to me that the assault on the United States was an assault on the concept of liberty. The ability of people to make decisions for themselves about the God they would worship and the way in which they would express their relationship to the Almighty. Religious liberty, of course, was the founding motivation for the United States of America. People came here to escape an imposed sense of spirituality instead of an inspired sense of spirituality. People had been martyred in Europe, and they came to the United States to be free to worship as they pleased. That sense of liberty, of course, found its way into the documents in addition to the Declaration of Independence. And it wasn't until it was the prime freedom to be enshrined in the Bill of Rights that the majority of the states and people in the United States of America began to endorse the concept of this nation as a nation at the core of which would be found this most important concept of liberty. And for some people on this globe, the idea of you and I having the opportunity to make decisions for ourselves regarding the way in which we relate to the Creator, it's an affront to them. And they believe that rather than as we believe that God created with great wisdom, they apparently believe that God created with at least one serious flaw, that He left people with the opportunity to make their own decisions about spirituality rather than imposing Himself upon all others. And so the fault line finds its way through the history of the United States and the world at this time between those who believe that we ought to be free in making decisions about our spiritual well-being and those who think that it is their job to make up for what God did not do and to impose the Almighty on others. That's at the core of this decision. And it's at the heart of what it means to be in the United States of America, that we have as our central thematic, as our unassailed, totally respected value of liberty. That we were created free, endowed by the Creator with the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And of course, I'm one who thinks that if you really take that language seriously, liberty is so central to it that the others don't have meaning without it. I mean, yes, of course, if you have liberty, you have life. And what do you use liberty for? It's to pursue happiness and to pursue satisfaction. This core of what America means is what was attacked on September the 11th, 2001. I told the pilot of the plane when the news came to me, I said, turn this plane around and fly back to Washington. He said, not going to do it. I said, I'm the Attorney General of the United States. Why won't you do it? He says, well, we don't have enough fuel to get back to Washington. It became clear to me that I should yield to the judgment of others. And we landed in Milwaukee, surrounded by SWAT team members from the local police force, while we refueled, and then I directed that we would fly back against the best advice we had from air traffic controllers and the like, because I felt it essential that we get back to Washington, D.C. I want to just stop for a moment here and elaborate on the fact that when we landed, we were surrounded by a security team from the Milwaukee law enforcement authorities. It's so common in settings like this for people to talk about the FBI and the soldiers from the United States of America and really the components of the Justice Department, because the Justice Department include all the U.S. Marshals and all the Drug Enforcement Administration and all those other national authorities in the armed forces. They're very important. But let me take a moment right here and at this time to commend local law enforcement officials who are the primary frontline safeguards of the concept of liberty in American culture. They are not to be respected, they are to be revered. And I believe that we have a serious deficit in the United States at this very moment in the way people, particularly those from Washington, D.C. and other areas, have disrespected the law enforcement community in the United States of America. And if we cherish liberty, we will understand that the role of those individuals is critical in safeguarding our liberties. Whether you think of Boston, the Twin Towers in New York, Orlando, San Bernardino, you name the assault on America, and you will define a location at which the first responders and the most important responders were the local responders, and they deserve our thanks and our respect. And Chief Stewart, thank you for being here today. I am grateful for you, and I resist this idea that the presumption of decency is reversed when it comes to law enforcement. Whether that's the President of the United States or the Governor of the state or the Attorney General of the United States who wants to say the first thing you expect when something happens with a police officer is that the police officer is guilty. I reject that unequivocally. It is unlikely to be true, and every presumption of value ought to inure to those individuals who put their lives on the line for us daily here in the United States of America. Well, meanwhile, we got the plane turned around and went back to Washington, D.C. Shortly before we landed in Washington, D.C., a fighter jet appeared off the wing of the plane. I could see the fighter jet pilot's face, and I thought for a moment how nice it is that they sent this plane to make sure we were safely taken to Washington. I think I misinterpreted that. Had we made the wrong turn on the way into Washington, someone other than John Ashcroft would be speaking to you today. But we landed, they tossed the Kevlar coat on me. They had found my wife, who had been doing some research over at the National Archives, I think. And they started us toward a destination which you hear about on television as a secure destination, a place for the alternative operation of government. Washington was as congested as a summer cold with people leaving the city. And there we were in an armored vehicle creeping down the interstate at the rate of about 6 miles an hour. And those who had chosen to jog instead of drive were passing. And I thought to myself, I don't like the idea of going to a hole in the ground in a setting like this, so I called and indicated that I would be returning to begin to mobilize the resources to respond to this threat from the position of the Justice Department, particularly the SIOC, the Strategic Information and Operations Center at the Department of Justice. The response of the United States of America was the right response, and we need to make sure that we don't forget the response. The first one observation I'd make is that America became unified in a way that it hasn't been unified in a long time. Washington has all the problems of significant urban settings, including those individuals who sometimes live under the underpasses in cardboard shacks. And those individuals haven't always endorsed what was going on in the country with great enthusiasm, but in the days following 9/11, I saw American flags draped over the cardboard of the refrigerator carton that some people called home. It was a symbol to me of the fact that we were unified. And we need to find ways of focusing on the central values of our culture that would unify us again. Of course, I believe that liberty is the central value. I went to the Justice Department after having met with the president the next day. Of course, he was held outside of Washington on 9/11 and should have been. There's no reason to bring the president into what might have been a high-risk, certainly was a high-risk environment, given the fact of the plane that hit the Pentagon and the other plane, which was taken down in Pennsylvania, which I believe was destined either for the United States Capitol or the White House. I don't think it's clear which of those, but the heroes who decided they would crash the plane in Pennsylvania saved a significant additional injury to the United States of America. The president came in the next day, looked in my direction. I thought he was speaking directly to me, and he may well have been. I took it that way. He said, "Never let this happen again." Now that meant to me one thing, that we would have to change what we were doing, or we would not change what we were getting. The business school, probably here at Missouri Southern, and I love this institution. I remember the days when I was governor and Dr. Leon was president, and this is a great, great institution. It will tell you that your system is perfectly designed to give you what you're getting. And if you don't like what you're getting, you should change what you're doing. Einstein put it this way, I think it was Einstein, who said, ignorance is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. My grandfather was an immigrant from Norway. He said it this way, he said, Jan, he said, I sawed this board off 4 times and it's still too short. You know, you have to change what you're doing if you don't like what you're getting. So I went to the Justice Department to try and begin to formulate a response and a strategy for America to be in a position to avoid, to default, to curtail, otherwise disrupt further efforts like that. And I won't detail that, and I'm very close to the end of my remarks. It won't be on the quiz or the final exam. What I'm saying is just entertainment. But I told the people at the Justice Department, we have to think outside the box. And then I qualified it very clearly. We can think outside the box, but we must never think outside the Constitution. because the Constitution is designed as a set of safeguards to make sure that the fundamental values of the United States of America, at the core of which we find the concept of liberty, that those values are not infringed, undermined, that they're not eroded, they're not devalued. That's what we're about. We will not give away who we are because someone seeks to destroy us. And I think the important thing about 9/11 is not that just we remember it, it's that we learn from it, and that we have learned that we can do things that will help us avoid the additional threats. Now, you know the threats are different now than they were. Al-Qaeda was an organization that preferred grand and spectacular attacks, and it focused in the main on trying to disengage the United States from the Middle East. Felt offended that the United States had interests in the Middle East and military installations that were close to their holiest sites. ISIS now has a different perspective. It is part of a caliphate, meaning it has geography, and the ultimate objective of ISIS is to impose a framework of spiritual understanding on the rest of the world against the idea of religious liberty. It's that pervasive, it's that simple, it's that substantial. Its simplicity does not somehow suggest that it doesn't have an evil scale about it. It threatens the very heart of who we are. And we were accustomed to, or became accustomed to, trying to default well-planned, orchestrated, high-profile attacks from a central authority, but ISIS not only suggests we have to have that kind of defense, but we have to be careful, because ISIS says to its potential adherents, if you're aware you cannot come back to the geography of our control, the caliphate, where we are setting up our world order, then wherever you are, inflict whatever damage you can against those who do not believe as we believe. And we have to understand that there are serious responsibilities we have. Those responsibilities fall upon each of us as individuals to cooperate in the sustenance of liberty, in the maintenance of the order which sustains an environment in which liberty can flourish. I thank you for remembering today. And as we remember, let us renew our commitment to liberty. Let us not take it lightly, either in our own deliberations and in our own effort to live lives in freedom. But as we understand the threat of others, let us make sure that we defend with a sense of real purpose, so that those generations who follow us might enjoy the kind of benefits that liberty has provided to each of us. And I thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you for your leadership during the time of 9/11, but since. Your remarks remind us of our principles and really make us proud to be Americans. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Alan, could you come up here to the podium for a moment? What Ellen has done for the city of Joplin, our region, is incredibly special. And it's an honor for those of us from the Joplin Globe to be part of this special presentation. When we unveil that special edition, you may be looking at the very last extra edition a newspaper may ever do on the same day of an event. Because of today, the digital world, the world of iPhones and iPads and computers, information is now instantaneous. And 15 years ago, that wasn't available. Now, our special editions today are going to be digital. And using a recent event after the tornado, we found out that our website blew up. And that month, we had over 400 million impressions come into our website for that instant information that used to be extra editions. So that makes our presentation even more special. Carol mentioned it in the video that our lobby was full of our readers lined up out into the street wanting to know what was going on. And that reminds us of what our role is is media. Our role is to provide that information, and now it's no matter how they want it or need it. And the print vehicle is still is as important as ever, but now we have other vehicles that make that happen. So it's really a privilege to be part of this event, very emotional, because we look back at 9/11 and we all have, our hearts are full of a variety of emotions from that day. And I remember where I was, and I know all of you do too, and every time I think about it, it just makes me pause and think about what happened, and then what our jobs in media after that was to provide information, not only about the event itself, but how it affected our local readers, our local citizens, because it had a profound impact on everyone, not only from a national scale, but to local scale. I bet there's many people in this audience that knew somebody directly who may have passed away as a result of 9/11, or knew somebody who knew somebody. So it had far-reaching arms to that day. And the fact that, and I've known Alan for a while, and I'm really impressed with his collections, but it's more of his passion of why he does it. And that's what I find inspiring. And then Alan's going to talk more about it, but what he had, the process he went through to create that is also inspiring and very humbling. So I thank you for all you've done in our community. You're very involved in the museum complex and engaged in the preservation of what is now historical significance to us, and now will have long-lasting benefits to generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it very much. Well, I don't have a whole lot of comments to make. Obviously, the very first thing that comes to mind for me is that when Darren Fullerton and I were setting the schedule, I screwed up because I made myself follow these two gentlemen and realizing how poor I was going to sound in relationship to their comments. But I think the thing that all of us remember about, and has been said, we all remember exactly where we were at, what we were doing, and the people who might have been around us at that particular time. I was sitting in a doctor's office. The mayor can understand this, being in the business. When I watched a person come in the door, and I was waiting in the waiting room of a clinic of about 4 physicians. And someone came in and said, somebody flew an airplane into the Twin Towers. And my first thought was, it's a little early in the day to be drinking, don't you think? That was my first impression. But unfortunately, just a few minutes later, someone came in and said, someone else has hit the other tower. And then suddenly, the waiting room got very quiet. And people began to realize that the dimensions, the aspect of what was happening. And so I finished the day, and most of the doctor's offices I called on was almost a lost cause. Everybody was focusing on the TV and what was going on. Some physicians even canceled their practices for that day. But I remember the one sensation coming home was the sensation of total silence. There were no aircraft in the air. And here in Joplin, we don't see a lot of aircraft, but I remember that day not even any jet stream tails in the air. There were no aircraft at all. And it was a very strange sensation stepping out my back door on the deck and looking to the sky and seeing nothing. And so I think that led me to really realize that this was a very important point in history, and we have to preserve it. And so that led me to getting after this project that I've gone to work on. It took about 4 years and a lot of graciousness of these individuals who were willing to sign the document. And I think the thing that I had to make clear was that this was something that was historic, and it was going to be an item that was going to go to the public. It was going to be something that we were going to dedicate to the public and with residents at the museum, which is exactly where something like this needs to be. So as each of the gentlemen signed the document, I reassured them each time that this is not going to wind up on eBay. This is not, someone's not trying to make money off this deal. This is something that is historic. It must be saved. And because of that, well, I was able to acquire the signatures of 10 people that were in office the day of the tragedy. Our governor, Matt Blunt, has signed the document. Our Lieutenant Governor, Peter Kinder, as a signer. Mr. Ashcroft, Rudy Giuliani, the governor of New York, or mayor of New York, excuse me, was signing it. And the day that I had a Secret Service agent who was willing to carry it to New York for me. And when he took it into Giuliani's office, there was Tom Van Assen, who was the commissioner of the New York firefighters, was also in his office. And I figured that a tremendous bonus that I was able to get his signature on the document as well. Our senator at the time, Kit Bond, has signed the document. Jim Talon, of course, and Roy Blunt. And then I was able to get the signature of Vice President Dick Cheney, and then very large signature at the top, President George W. Bush. So as far as my understanding, this is the only originally dated 9/11 newspaper with all 10 original signatures of the people in office that exist in the world today. And I think because of that uniqueness, there's no better place for this document to reside than with the public and at the museum for display to the public. So that's been my goal. It took 4 years to get the signatures, and it's been in hiding for 11 years now, waiting for this date of tomorrow to show up to make this event happen. And that was my goal all along. We had some issues along the way, health problems, things of that nature, but we have been able to persevere, and we're still here. So I wonder if Mike would be willing to help me on the unveiling of the document. So. I'll take this side over here. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I guess.
Well, that concludes our program. I want to thank everybody. Again, thank you. It's inspiring today. I'm just, the emotion is of pride and that of being an American. So with that, we're going to end the program, and then all of you can go up and look at the front page. And again, thank you very much for coming. I know it's a beautiful day, and you had a lot of other things to do, and I appreciate you all coming today. Thank you very much.